All right, here we go. Today is Sunday, February 10th, 2019, and this is episode 233 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. How you doing today, buddy?
Doing very well. How are you?
Yeah, I am doing okay. I went out for a couple tasty beverages with a buddy yesterday, and I'm not as young as I used to be. I'll put it that way. So
I understand.
Aside from that, I'm doing great.
Awesome. So, just a reminder before we get much further, the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So some upcoming news. We've been invited to do a live episode of Defensive Sec in front of a live audience. Well, I hope they'll be live.
Wait a minute. Are they sure that they didn't mistake us for somebody better?
Hey, look, let's roll with it before they figure out their mistake.
Okay, great. Well, that's exciting. When and where?
It is Saturday, March 30th in Orlando, Florida. It's B-Sides Orlando.
Wow.
I know, it's fancy.
I think it's kind of fancy. All right.
Yeah.
Pro tip. Let's not screw that up.
That's for sure. That's for sure. And we have to have tchotchkes in case we do to smooth it over.
Yeah, $50, right? I think is the preferred tchotchke these days.
Dang, inflation.
So we'll be down there. I don't think we know the schedule yet. Like, we don't know what time our little shindig is, but
correct.
It's a one-day event, so sometime during Saturday.
Yeah, it appears to be a pretty impressive show. So, I mean, I've watched some of the videos, and it looks to be a very well-run show.
Well,
so,
we're bringing the average down, so better start high.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Let's see. So another big announcement. I think there are only 4 people in the U.S. who are not running for president, so I'm announcing my candidacy right now. There we go. Let's get that out of the way. The Llama Party. Uh-oh.
I mean, did you have a platform of any variety that you'd like to, put out there?
Do you need one?
Eventually, I think so. I mean, you got to have something to put in.
I didn't think this all the way through. Okay.
Right, I mean,
I didn't look.
When you're out begging for money, you've got to at least, make unrealistic promises to get the money.
Oh, wait. Okay, so think of unrealistic promises. I'm just making a note. Hang on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
A llama in every pot?
No. What?
Don't you remember the old a chicken in every pot?
Yeah, but that just is wrong. Anyway.
Well, good luck. If you win, I'd like Australia.
I don't think that's how this works.
What?
But anyway.
Damn it.
Anyway, so on a more serious and sober note, let's get into some stories. The first one today comes from SecurityWeek.com, and the title is Hackers Use RDP are increasingly... Let me try that again. Hackers using RDP are increasingly using network tunneling to bypass protections.
Yeah, it's a clumsy headline.
Yeah, that happens. So here's the deal, and this I actually this one resonated with me because I've actually seen this sort of thing in the wild. It's a pain in the rear end because it, as they point out in the article, it leaves very little kind of hard forensics. Now, there are certainly some types of memory forensics you can do to recover what was happening kind of graphically on the screen, but in terms of like actual logs on what was clicked on or whatever, as compared to things like PowerShell scripts and whatnot, it's a much cleaner attack method for a bad guy than something command line-ish.
So the idea here is they're just leveraging the built-in remote desktop to jump onto systems and then to script sort of forwarding as well, right? From what I'm reading.
Yeah. So they the one thing that's not really clearly articulated in this article is this is being paired with other kinds of attacks. So they're talking about compromising different types of systems in a network, and then configuring those systems in order to relay traffic or RDP traffic. So they give the example of a jump host that straddles kind of let's say a corporate network with an isolated network, and so they talk about how attackers are compromising that jump host and then configuring Windows, usually primarily Windows, right? They're configuring that jump host through tools like NetSH to forward RDP traffic on some other random port from the kind of either the internet directly or some other part of the company's network into that isolated network, and all that can be done in a manner that doesn't interrupt the normal method of communication, the normal use of that jump server by actual valid administrators.
Yeah. So, but this just comes back to again. Just locking down and defending your RDP, right? Limiting its ability to flow if it shouldn't, making sure the passwords are I guess hardened or even going two-factor, because this really is still relying upon them at some point harvesting some valid credentials, I imagine, to be able to jump over RDP. It's not that they are hacking the RDP protocol, it's that they have valid credentials and are then leveraging RDP.
Yeah, correct. They've already penetrated the organization. They've already collected credentials through some means, right. And now this is really lateral movement,
right?
And I will tell you, we continue to see, and we talk about it on the show a fair amount, right? We continue to see a lot of organizations being compromised via RDP that's directly exposed on the internet, and
which is a bad idea.
Yeah, it is definitely a bad idea, and in those cases, it's a little unclear whether how those attacks actually happen. Is it password reuse, i.e., password stuffing attacks, or is it default passwords? Like let's say there's some standard piece of software installed with a default user ID and password, or is it chained with like phishing? So they try to phish some IT person or someone who otherwise would have access to log into that and then get their ID and password.
Or even a multi-step attack where they get on somebody's local desktop and then just start gathering hashes and
absolutely right.
Either replaying or breaking those hashes, and the typical methodology of going lateral in a Windows environment. I guess the difference here is that they're just leveraging RDP because it's ubiquitous and it's easy and it's low log evidence of what actually is being done in those sessions. Correct.
And a lot of organizations aren't really looking for RDP traffic. And so one of the points in this article is you ought to be looking for RDP going between endpoints that you shouldn't expect to see that, and then also looking for RDP being tunneled across other protocols where you wouldn't expect to see those, and then and then obviously go investigate. But also, I think you touched on it a little bit ago, and making sure that you can't log in, or your systems are not logged in, not able to be logged in using local accounts.
Right.
So in the context of a Windows Active Directory environment, you should not allow local administrator, for instance, to be able to log in across the network.
Hopefully. Yet a lot of admins do, because it's a convenient and useful tool for remote administration.
Yeah, well, correct. And it's not that you shouldn't allow any administrator to log in. It's that specific local administrator account shouldn't be logged in. So anyway, there's a whole host of best practices on Microsoft site. If you want to learn a lot more about this, go search for Red Forests or Secure Access Workstations. Lots of stuff they've written about it. And I think it's something that, by the way, is very rarely implemented by most organizations. So, and it leads to tears. I'll tell you that. So,
yeah.
All right, moving on to the next story, which comes from ZDNet, and the title here is "Trojan Malware is back, and it's the biggest hacking threat to your business." So
that's a bold claim.
It's the biggest and baddest, I guess. Right?
And all businesses are under equal levels of threat, clearly.
Absolutely. So, this is about an article about a Malware Labs report that points out that over the past year, Trojan malware, so they kind of segment Trojan and backdoors as slightly different, but almost tripled in terms of frequency from 2017 to 2018. And they pointed out that two particular Trojans are really quite common. One is Emotet and the other is TrickBot. TrickBot is often actually installed by Emotet, if that's not confusing enough. And these, by the way, are kind of, multi-use Trojans. We saw them used in cases like the ransomware attacks on, I think it was the city of Anchorage and a couple of other places. This, as I understand it, is one of the tools used to collect and sell access into organizations on the black market. So there's operations to
Jerry.
Yeah.
The appropriate term is dark web.
Oh, sorry.
God, you're such a square black market.
I know. Man. Oh well. I'll try harder. We'll
go back and edit that.
I'll edit that out, yeah. It'll be fine.
Jeez. My God.
It'll be fine.
That's the kind of thing that destroys our credibility in this industry, mister.
So they point out that as compared to other types of malware like crypto ransomware, which was only up 9% year over year, this is a much more significant increase. And they point out that it appears like it's related to an increased interest in stealing data rather than the what we had been seeing with ransomware. Although I will say that this, as far as I understand, as we again saw in Alaska, is a method of delivering ransomware. So it's kind of like a broad spectrum disease that can be used to implant other problems. So it seems problematic to me to try to break it up this way. That's all I can say right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that there's usually multiple phases, right? And the initial exploit is not necessarily in any way related to whatever is then dropped on the box after exploitation. So, that's what these toolkits are meant for, is to plug and play different payloads and different exploits and different things to be downloaded later. So that they can, once you've got a basic foothold, you can then drop other stuff on there as you see fit based on whatever your goals are.
That's right.
And I mean, I'm not questioning any of the validity of this particular report at all, but a couple of things to keep in mind. It's what Malwarebytes was able to detect is what went into this report. So, I mean, you have to look at the efficacy of their detection, because that's all that they're reporting on. So, something to keep in mind. It could be something is flying under the radar, or, their detection changed. So their ability, the incidents didn't necessarily change, but their ability to detect it did. There's a lot of things that could go into potentially swaying these percentage changes.
Yeah, well, certainly. And I think it's also important to understand that Malwarebytes is only seeing what Malwarebytes sees, right? So they're
right.
They're not necessarily seeing other types of attacks that are reliant on malware, and that actually kind of dovetails into the second, the next article, which comes from CSO Online, and the title is "Phishing has become the root of most cyber evil."
Now wait a second.
Right. So,
you just told me that Trojan malware is the biggest threat,
and now this one says it's phishing.
It's no wonder we're confused.
Yeah, I mean, you ever get? I remember a long time ago, I used to be an ardent reader of Scott Adams Dilbert books, and I remember one of his books. He talked about how in the future marketing would become so effective that you basically would buy whatever was most recently advertised to you before you got to the store. And
so whatever the advertisement was right outside the store is what you have to buy.
Right. And this just kind of harkens back to that concept. It's everybody's kind of got a perspective on what the most important security threat is. And the reality is they're all important. They're all serious. Most businesses are plagued by all of these things. And it's kind of a crapshoot of, what's more important.
Well, and to put my cynical hat on for a moment, this particular report on phishing came from F5. The last report came from Malwarebytes. So again, we've got two different vendors in the space driving the narrative.
Right.
And of course, their goal is to either A, build credibility, or B, build mind share, ultimately to help sell their products. So you always have to question, what is it that the vendor is selling that may help with the problem they're helping to define, right? So the vendor will often define the problem as the problem they can solve, not necessarily the problem you actually have. So this is something that I keep going back to, and I don't know a better way to fix it yet. We do have some attempts to fix it, like with things like Gartner and other, sort of firms like that, but you always have to be careful when you're reading something that's sourced from a vendor, because they have ulterior motives, whether they want to admit it or not, or even know it or not.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're incentivized generally to to collect and report on data that is relevant to the things that that's in their wheelhouse. Why would you spend time collecting stuff that's not relevant to the stuff you do? That just doesn't make sense.
And who knows how scientifically accurate these are. I mean, I remember working for vendors that will go unnamed, that we would be at a major trade show and the marketing guys would go ask 50 people at the trade show and then put out a press release on that study.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, you're kidding me. So I'm not saying that these are that scientifically unrigorous as that example, but I'm just saying, be careful when you take this stuff at face value.
Yeah, I don't think you can really look at one of these headlines and say, well, that is the top threat, because it's the top threat from the perspective of the data that they gathered and analyzed.
I'm more willing to consider phishing probably a bigger threat than Trojans. That's just me. But that's anecdotal, gut feeling evidence. I can't back that up with statistics like I should.
Yeah, so they do in this article. I mean, for all the griping we did, they do point out a number of of actual real concerns. As they point out, 93% of phishing websites actually now use SSL or TLS certificates. Largely because of it's become very pervasive and easy to use with the advent of Let's Encrypt. Not bashing Let's Encrypt, just saying it is what it is. We kind of taught people over the past 15 years to look for the stupid green lock, and now they and now we're a victim of our own success on that front.
Right.
And they point out with respect again to F5. Apparently, F5 does some work in taking down malicious websites. They point out that the vast majority of sites they take down, 75.6%, in fact, were phishing websites, as opposed to the number 2 at only 11.3%, which was malicious scripts, so like exploit kits and whatnot. So, obviously most most of the effort right now is in collecting credentials. And I have a feeling, and this is a difficult, again, not quantifiable gut feeling, but I have a feeling that the predominant or the preponderance of those are going to be attacks against consumers and not against, or not necessarily against organizations. I mean, at the end of the day, it is against an organization, but it's, their they're direct attacks on consumers trying to masquerade as, let's say, a bank or a retailer or what have you.
Yeah, I would say that from a volume standpoint, sure, but I would say enterprises, phishing still plays a major role in the beginning of most enterprise exploits and attacks as well.
I mean, look at the old WellPoint, now Anthem, right? That was WE11point.com.
Right.
that got them bit. So and so it goes. So absolutely, they do point out a couple of ideas, which I don't think are necessarily revolutionary, but making sure that you identify email that originates from outside of your organization. So a lot of organizations put the word external in brackets at the start of the subject line for email that comes in from the outside. I will tell you that is becoming a much more difficult thing to do in the modern, in modern IT, because a lot of our, increasingly, a lot of our business systems are not, kind of quote inside the firewall. They're, software as a service type things. They're,
right, and they're generating regular emails that, end up getting marked as external because they're coming from outside of the, the internal mail domain, at least from the MX's perspective. So they get marked as external, and then people are like, well, it's not external, it's our HR vendor. Well, yeah, but it's
right. So you end up depending on how you handle that, you can kind of create some bad practices. And so you really want to think about how best to handle that in training, because if you say, always be suspicious of emails that come from outside that look like they're legitimate, and then all of a sudden, your legitimate payroll emails come from outside, you get the point.
Yes.
Antivirus software to catch malware when users click on a phishing link. Pretty obvious, but that is, that's look, we talk about that a lot. The whole point of malware these days is being able to evade antivirus, and so I've become a pretty strong advocate of looking for things that are much more affirmative controls, like whitelisting and by the way, I love services like Proofpoint. I don't have any horse in the Proofpoint race at all. But one thing I really like about that is the ability to go back and retrospectively look at who might have clicked on a link once you've determined that it is in fact malicious. So on the one hand, by the way, you see a lot of people complaining about the way that a service like Proofpoint works, because it really mangles links in websites, links in emails. And so the old trick about hovering your mouse cursor over the link is really no longer an effective thing once you have a service like that. But at the same time, it's kind of offset by the fact that it's also doing its own screening, and then lets you do some more advanced capabilities that you wouldn't have otherwise. Like, at a certain point, again, you can go back retrospectively and look at who clicked on it, but you can also neuter it so that anybody that clicks on it in the future is redirected to some benign place rather than the malicious thing. So that, by the way, let me give you a little piece of advice. If you use a service like that, you need to update your training, your phishing simulations. Okay?
Right. Right. Because otherwise you can confuse all your employees. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because if you send out phishing simulations and they have legitimate actual URLs in them, and that people can kind of tell that they were originated from inside the company, not outside the company. So yeah.
These things get complicated.
Let's see. Web filtering to block known phishing sites, pretty simple, but becoming increasingly complicated with things like TLS3, by the way. And there's a move afoot. I don't remember if TLS 1.3 has it or not, but I know that there's a move to take the SNI header, which has the domain, and and move it's currently outside, so you can do some filtering and make that encrypted too. So if that happens, it's quite difficult.
Well, yeah, I mean, on that topic, we've got this big culture war going on between privacy advocates and corporate security folks on the ability to inspect this traffic.
Correct.
And I certainly see where the privacy advocates are coming from, that there's weaknesses that TLS previous to 1.3 had that allowed silent, undetectable man-in-the-middle inspection, and that's bad. I get it. But at the same time, corporate security has used that ability to inspect for malware and other malicious activity and keep companies safe. So we actually are going to end up blinding a lot of tools if we don't redesign some of that architecture. And the privacy crowd is not too sympathetic to that. They basically say that's the price of admission. Deal with it. But it's very scary to somebody like me when I see that all my DLP tools, my anti-malware tools, my ability to spot tunneling through proxies, and all sorts of stuff is going to get completely blinded by TLS 1.3.
Yeah, I think look, both sides have objectively valid points, right? And I think part of the issue is that we're trying to apply the same type, the very same technology in both venues, and that is causing a big problem. It makes good sense that when we're acting on our own in our personal lives, that we would want a version of TLS 1.3 that doesn't let anybody else man in the middle of us without us knowing. But at the same time, in the context of an organization, we have a responsibility to protect that organization and all the data and systems that it contains. And, a key component of that, as we've talked about over and over and over and over again, that stuff is primarily coming in via the web, and not being able to see what's inside those flows is really problematic. So, yeah.
And I'm sure people are saying, well, there are solutions, there are technologies and ways to deal with it. Yes, there are. This is not an unsolvable problem, but it certainly adds to the complexity.
Correct. Yeah, we saw, for instance, I think even with TLS 1.3, you can use a local certificate on that you store on devices to facilitate that man in the middle. But I think we saw recently, I guess it was as recent as last week, there was some Mozilla Firefox update that actually broke if you were doing man in the middle because of some particular problem. So, it's not, we're using the technology in a way that's not really intended, but is also at the same point in the context of a business or organization is very important. So,
yeah, I would agree.
All right. So other things, single sign-on, which reduces password fatigue. I think the next one is really where you want to be, multi-factor authentication. By the way, we didn't include it in the list of stories this week, but there was a story about a bank going publicly announcing that they were their customers were victims of the attacks using signaling system 7 to obtain second factors delivered over SMS.
Ouchie.
Yeah. So there's look, as everybody knows, some two-factor is better than no two-factor, but I think pretty quickly as more and more of the world moves to two-factor, we're gonna we have to wrestle with the realization that once we cut off the people's ability to use just a password to log in, they're gonna really start going after in earnest two-factor, and this stuff takes a long time to change, and so I would recommend starting to think about, if you're using SMS-based two-factor, start thinking about what you're going to do next.
Agreed.
Access controls to limit employees from reaching critical systems. That one is really important, and that one we talked a lot about in the Sing Health breach. That was a big factor there, and actually I think it's probably a pretty big factor in most breaches. I don't know that a lot of organizations actually do a great job of segmenting and really delineating permissions. There's this zero trust wave or methodology wave, and to some extent I'm perceiving it as a bit of a sickness. Now I know that's going to be kind of controversial, but I think a lot of organizations kind of cherry pick the aspects of zero trust that they like, and not the parts that they don't understand or don't like, and
which kind of undercuts the whole point.
Correct,
and could lead to false sense of security.
Yeah, exactly, and not to mention, I don't know that the technology we have is generally in a place, that can withstand or can reasonably sustain that kind of a model. We see over and over kind of remotely exploitable via the network types of things, and in the context of a zero trust model, I mean that's a house of cards that can implode really fast if you're not careful.
Sure.
All right, so and then fraud. They say fraud detection to quickly find infected endpoints, and by that they mean being able to see evidence that a system or workstation has been compromised, and maybe via lateral indications of lateral movement and so on. That's pretty important.
And let's not forget, they also say train your employees a lot and often.
Correct.
Which we have talked at length about the pros and cons of that approach.
Yeah, I mean, look, you got to train your employees. There's no debate about that. My view is the debate is about to what extent do we expect employees to be a robust control, and
right. Agreed.
Anyway,
how much do you count on it?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And my personal view, I think yours is too, that it's kind of setting people up to fail if you count on them too much.
Yeah, we've seen too many incidents where, for lots of reasons, stress and competing priorities and how they're rewarded, whatever the system is, you can certainly train them and hope for the best, but if you're not backstopping that with technology, you're going to get popped.
Right. Right. All right. Next story comes from Dark Reading, and the title here is Ransomware Attack via MSP locks customers out of systems. So there was a managed services provider. So think general IT service provider that had, depending on who you read, it's not cited directly in the story here, but somewhere around 100 customers apparently, with somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000 systems being impacted. This provider used a piece of software called Kaseya. I think that's how you say it, Kaseya, VSARMM, and this software has a central server and is used to manage the endpoints in the client organization. So it's kind of an automation tool. Now, these customers had additionally used this tool called ConnectWise from a different company, which was used to, as far as I can tell, it was some kind of trouble ticket integration tool. Well, that particular plugin for Kaseya had a vulnerability, and I guess if you actually go, there's a link to a Reddit, a discussion on Reddit, which is apparently about this attack, although it's not exactly clear if it is or it's not, but same technology and same kind of outcome. The vulnerability in this ConnectWise was apparently found back in 2017 and was patched some time ago. I guess it was patched last year. And in fact, it was not only patched, but the company that makes ConnectWise actually pulled it off of their app store. And now there's a lot of hoopla going on about whether or not Kaseya and ConnectWise did enough to notify customers of the problem, proactively. That part's a little unclear.
And this is a tough one because it's sort of a plug-in to a fairly obscure piece of software to begin with. I would bet most vulnerability management scanning tools probably wouldn't have picked this one up.
Me too. And I, to be honest, I had never heard of either of these pieces of technology, and I've been around IT for a long time. But I guess this does sound like it's a fairly commonly used piece of technology in the managed services provider space. So, maybe it's a fairly, has a fairly narrow market. But there's a few pieces of data that's really not clear to me, like exactly how the attack went down. Now, we know that the attack leveraged a vulnerability in this ConnectWise plugin, which was apparently an SQL injection vulnerability, which allowed the attackers basically full control of this VSA console. And once they had that access, they could effectively push out the ransomware, which in this case was Grand Crab. And again, over the span of like 80 customers, effectively all at the same time, all of their systems were infected with Grand Crab and locked up. What's not clear to me at all is where that server resided. Was that in the end customer's network, or was it in this unnamed managed services provider's network? And why the heck was it accessible by the internet? Was it even accessible from the internet? There's a bunch of questions I don't really understand. When I read the discussion in that Reddit forum, I'm kind of left with the thought that it was accessible by the internet, which scares the hell out of me, by the way.
Yeah, and this also brings up the concept we've talked about occasionally, which is a concentration of risk when you start using outsourced service providers like this. Now, it's inevitable, and I'm not saying don't do it, but this is a small version of what would happen if somebody found some pervasive backdoor in Azure or AWS or whatever, right? Or they found a way to take over the system management console of a major security MSSP, for instance, and suddenly could change firewall rules for 1,000 customers. There is this minor edge case risk that I think it's small, but it's there. And I wouldn't say don't avoid using outsourced providers, but it's something to think about when you're vetting them. How good are they running their own security?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that is really important. Understanding the security practices of your IT outsourcers and making sure they have reasonably good security is very important. And it occurs to me that this problem is probably going to over time affect almost every organization, because IT in general is becoming much more automated and orchestrated, and we're becoming increasingly reliant on automation tools. And my observation is that managed services providers, just by the nature of their business, have been kind of leaders in deploying that automation and orchestration software, and so yeah, that it makes sense that we're going to see that because with these MSPs, because that's where it's probably most intensely deployed at, and it's also one-stop shopping for a bad actor to go and try to get some money, but at the same time, if you go with an MSP, there are other advantages, so it's not all badness, right? The MSPs tend to be able to do things. It's kind of like the rants I've been on about cloud. And I used to be against cloud pretty ardently, but I now believe that it makes a lot of sense because in general, most organizations can't run a data center as well as a cloud provider can.
Sure.
And I think that in most cases, especially smaller organizations, aren't going to be able to run an IT environment as well as an MSP can.
Well, this goes back to the old, business 101, which is your business should focus on your core competency, and anything that isn't your core competency, outsource to somebody else who,
right,
whatever it is their core competency.
Exactly.
So you can focus on what you're best at, and you outsource to whomever is best at whatever you're outsourcing, so you can focus on, your core competency that differentiate you. And I think we're finally at a point in IT where that's probably going to happen more and more often.
Yeah, I've talked about it a lot. I really think that over time, IT starts to become a utility play. It's going to be like power and water. It's not going to make sense for you to, as an organization, to run your own IT because you just won't be able to do it as efficiently or as securely or as at the same level of quality as someone else. But there will always be a need for a generator, right? So there probably will always be a need for some kind of on-prem type IT, and I actually think we're starting to see that with this recent buzzword of what we're calling edge computing. So that's anyway. So moving on to the very last thing. This is something that caught my eye. It's an update from DLA Piper, which is I believe it's a law firm, and they wrote a report on basically the first 8 months of the GDPR. And there's really one very particularly interesting thing to me. In that 8-month time, there have been 59,000 personal data breaches reported to data protection authorities in Europe. 59,000. That's not 59,000 people or records. That's 59,000 breaches. That, by the way, does not include other kinds of GDPR violations like we recently saw with Google, where they were fined 50 million euro by the French CNIL Data Protection Authority for apparently, or I guess it's allegedly, maybe it's not allegedly anymore, for doing stuff with data that they hadn't disclosed or obtained consent from the data subjects on. And so all of that type of activity is outside. This is actually 59,000 data breaches, which is really incredible.
That is crazy. And I have no idea what their capacity to absorb and deal with that many reports are. But it makes you wonder, especially because the next line in this report is these range from minor breaches such as errant emails sent to the wrong recipient to major cyber hacks affecting millions of individuals making front page news. So immediately my thought process is it really useful to be reporting errant emails sent to the wrong recipient? But I don't know. I mean, that's the law as it is. And is the organization charged with taking these reports and processing them effectively able to keep up? I don't know.
I really don't know. And as far as I know, there's only been a small handful, and I can actually only think of one off the top of my head, fines levied in response to an actual data breach. So, all of the fines I'm aware of so far have been related to activities, save one, that have been related to activities that were, basically mishandling or misrepresenting how personal data was being handled. The breakdown, by the way, of where the data breaches happened was kind of interesting in just sheer numbers wise. 15,400 of them were in the Netherlands, and 12,600 were in Germany, and then 10,600 were in the UK, 3,800 in Ireland. It would be interesting, by the way, back to your to the point you made a couple minutes ago, to be able to kind of see the distribution of like number of impacted individuals. What does that look like? Is there only are 90% or 95% of these like the misdirected email?
Right.
And only a handful of really big, really actual major data breaches or what? Don't really know. But yeah, I have this kind of mental picture of the data protection authorities kind of being like that old I Love Lucy skit where the cookies or the cakes or whatever are coming off the assembly line much faster than they're able to catch them. And
right.
This is like I knew there were going to be a lot, but I didn't have any conception that it would be 59,000 in 8 months. So
yeah, it's crazy, but
not a lot of other in my estimation, interesting information in the report. They do talk about a couple of notable fines levied in response to some breaches, but they're all pretty small, like £80,000 or €80,000, €5,000. So it's kind of interesting that, not sure if the big fines are kind of off in the future still, or, or are they just going to be so overwhelmed deluged in data breaches that they just have to be super selective in what they pursue? I just don't know. But it's interesting. We are seeing other countries, by the way, like Canada and here in the U.S., California is trying to enact something somewhat similar. Japan enacted something similar too. So this kind of regime is becoming more the norm, and I suspect most organizations have to kind of, even if you're not, especially if you're not already operating under GDPR regulations, kind of think about like what would you do if you had to, because they're probably coming to a regulator near you. So anyway, that is the last of our stories for today.
Cool.
So just a reminder, you can find links to all the things we talked about tonight on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kallett on Twitter at Lurg, me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. You can also, by the way, go to my Mastodon instance. It's infosec.exchange and sign up there. It's kind of like Twitter, but a lot less crazy. That's the way I'd say it.
So far,
yes, so far. It'll catch up probably. Yeah. So anyway, thanks everyone. Have a great week, and we'll talk again soon.
And shout out to our Patreon donors.
Yes.
As always, you guys are awesome.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.